Just sign it, Lion. Let's make this all go away. The words hung in the chilled air of the office, as sterile and impersonal as the glass wall behind Mr. Albright's head. Outside that window, the city sprawled into a glittering, indifferent horizon. Inside, the world had shrunk to the space of a mahogany desk, a piece of paper, and the man who expected her to surrender her name to a lie. Lion stood perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Her uniform was immaculate, a crisp gray tunic with the hotel's golden crest stitched over the heart. It was a uniform she had worn with pride for 7 years, a symbol of order and competence. Now, in the silent judgment of this 40th floor office, it felt like a costume, one that assigned her a role she was suddenly refusing to play. Mr. Albright, the general manager of the Grand Meridian, leaned back in his leather throne, the expensive fabric groaning in protest. He wasn't a man accustomed to waiting. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his navy suit sharp enough to cut glass, and his patience was a resource he expended with extreme prejudice. He tapped a manicured finger on the document lying between them. "It's a formality," he continued, his voice a low purr of condescending reason. "Mr. Sterling is an influential guest. He had a fall. He's threatening litigation. The lawyers want a clear line of accountability. This," he gestured to the paper, "gives them that. It's an internal matter. You sign, we close the file. Everyone moves on." Lion's gaze dropped to the document. The hotel's letterhead was embossed at the top, heavy and official. The text was dense, a thicket of legal jargon, but the core of it was brutally simple. "I, Lion Mutabazi, as housekeeping supervisor on duty, accept full responsibility for the failure to adhere to safety protocols on the evening of September 7th, resulting in the incident involving Mr. Sterling. A failure and admission, a neat, tidy box in which to place the blame." She remembered that evening with perfect clarity. She had been conducting her final rounds, her team moving with the quiet efficiency she had trained into them. The area around the indoor pool deck was their last checkpoint. Her junior housekeeper, May, had just finished mopping the marble surround, placing the yellow wet floor signs at precise 10-foot intervals. Lion had checked the floor herself, running her shoe over the tile. It was dry. Not damp, not slick. Dry. An hour later, Mr. Sterling, reeking of scotch from the VIP lounge, had staggered from the steam room, ignored the signs, and slipped. He hadn't fallen hard, more of a clumsy slide into a lounge chair, but his outrage had been volcanic. Albright saw her hesitation, mistaking it for fear. He softened his approach, shifting from command to faux collaboration. "Look, Lion, you have a stellar record here. 7 years without a single complaint. Let's not let one unlucky moment tarnish that. Sign the form. I'll personally ensure there are no repercussions for your career. We'll call it a learning experience for the team. This is how we protect the hotel." "It's how we protect you." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. He wasn't asking her to take responsibility. He was asking her to become a human shield, to absorb a blow meant for the hotel's reputation and its insurance premiums. He expected her to be grateful for the opportunity. She lifted her eyes from the paper and met his gaze. He saw her as a component, a cog in the vast, glittering machine of the Grand Meridian. A reliable, efficient, and ultimately replaceable part. He couldn't conceive of the intricate system she managed every single day, the complex scheduling, the supply chain logistics, the multilingual coordination of a staff of 50 people. He saw the uniform, not the woman. For a fleeting second, the injustice of it all burned in her chest, a hot, metallic taste in her mouth. She imagined the relief on his face if she just picked up the pen. The quick, dismissive smile, the file closing, her integrity a small price for his convenience. Would you endure this? Would you sign away the truth of your work just to make a powerful man's day easier? The pen lay next to the paper, a sleek silver instrument. It looked cold to the touch. "Mr. Sterling was intoxicated, sir," she said. Her voice was quiet, even, betraying none of the fire in her gut. He ignored 3 warning signs. "My housekeeper, May Lai, had just confirmed the floor was dry and secure not an hour before. I double-checked it myself." Albright's manufactured smile tightened. It was not the response he had anticipated. He had expected compliance, perhaps a few tears, followed by a shaky signature. He had not expected facts. "The guest's condition is not the issue," he said, the warmth evaporating from his tone. "The issue is the perception of liability, and our official stance is that the floor was not up to standard. Your stance needs to align with ours." He was telling her to trade reality for the company's narrative. He was ordering her to adopt his lie as her own. The empty signature line on the page seemed to mock her, a tiny void waiting to swallow her name, her 7 years of flawless work, her truth. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the starched collar of her uniform suddenly feeling tight around her neck. She thought of May, a young woman sending money back to her family in Gwangju, who would be the first to be fired if this failure was officially logged. She thought of her own name, the one her father had given her, a name that meant vine in their language, something that grows, that holds on, that finds its way toward the light. Lion looked at Mr. Albright, the powerful man in his powerful office, and gave him the one thing he was not prepared for. "No," she said. It was not loud. It was not defiant. It was a simple, solid fact dropped into the middle of his pristine office. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Albright's jaw went slack for a fraction of a second before hardening into a mask of disbelief, then fury. The benevolent manager persona vanished, vaporized by a single 2-letter word. The air in the room, already cool, dropped several degrees. He leaned forward, his voice no longer a purr but a low, dangerous growl. "I don't think you understand what's at stake here, Lion." "I think I'm the only one who does," she replied, her voice still impossibly calm. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a uniform or a function but as an obstacle. "You are making a very, very serious mistake." "Of course." I will now expand upon the story, adding greater depth, detail, and emotional resonance to each of the remaining 14 sections. The heavy door of Mr. Albright's office clicked shut behind Lion, the sound unnervingly final. The 40th floor hallway, usually a space of transit and purpose, felt like a vacuum, the thick piled carpet absorbing all sound. She stood for a moment, letting her composure settle back into place, a mask of professional calm she had perfected over 7 years. Her heart, however, was a frantic drum against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage of starched gray fabric. She focused on her breathing, a silent, internal rhythm that was hers alone. "Lion, a word, please." The voice was syrupy sweet, a stark and unsettling contrast to Albright's icy commands. Brenda Vance, the director of human resources, emerged from an adjacent alcove where she had clearly been waiting. She was Albright's velvet glove, the one deployed to smooth over the messes made by his iron fist, to reframe coercion as concern. She wore a silk blouse in a soothing shade of beige and a smile that never quite reached the cool, assessing depths of her eyes. It was a smile Lion had seen her use 100 times, always preceding a difficult conversation or an elegantly worded termination. "That sounded intense," Brenda began, her tone a masterclass in feigned empathy. She guided Lion toward a small seating area furnished with leather armchairs that were likely more expensive than Lion's car. "I just want you to know the C-suite can be a stressful environment. We don't expect everyone to be comfortable with that level of pressure. It's a different world up here." The microaggression was so perfectly polished, so expertly delivered, it almost slipped by. "We don't expect you to understand." The implication hung in the air, as clear as the crystal water carafe on the table beside them. People who wore uniforms, people who worked with their hands, were not equipped to handle the sophisticated stresses of men who wore suits. They were simpler creatures, to be managed and guided for their own good. Lion remained silent, her posture erect, refusing the offered seat. To sit would be to accept the role of the supplicant, the troubled employee in need of counseling. She clutched the simple, spiral-bound notebook she carried with her on her rounds. It was a cheap, functional thing, its blue cover soft and dog-eared from years of being tucked into her pocket. Inside were the intricate gears of her department, staffing schedules, supply inventories, maintenance requests logged with the precision of an engineer, and most importantly, pages upon pages of translations. Clauses from safety manuals, notes from HR bulletins, chemical handling instructions for new cleaning agents, all carefully translated into Mandarin for May and the other housekeepers who were still mastering English. It was a ledger of her unseen labor, a diary of her quiet competence, a testament to a skill no one in management had ever bothered to ask about. Brenda's eyes flickered down to the notebook, a brief, dismissive glance. "Listen, Lion," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a practiced gesture of false intimacy. "I've always admired your work ethic. You're organized, you're diligent." She gestured vaguely at the notebook. "You and your little lists, it's wonderful. A place for everything and everything in its place. I get it. But this situation with Mr. Sterling is above your pay grade. It's a legal matter, a chess game. You don't want to be a pawn in that, do you?" There it was again, the gentle, smiling dismissal of her intellect, reducing her meticulous work to little lists. The outrage was a physical sensation, a hot wave that rose from her stomach to her throat. She swallowed it down, keeping her face a placid mask. "If that happened to you, what would you do? How would you keep the rage from your face?" "Albright is a bottom-line kind of man," Brenda continued, leaning in as if sharing a great secret. "He sees a problem, he wants it fixed, quickly. That form, it's just the paperwork that makes the problem disappear. It doesn't have to mean anything. It's just an administrative solution, a piece of paper that satisfies the lawyers and makes the insurance company happy." "It's a lie," Lion said. The words were not loud, but they were sharp and clear, cutting through Brenda's fog of corporate euphemisms. Brenda's smile faltered for a second, a tiny crack in the perfect facade. She straightened up, her own mask of empathy slipping to reveal the hard steel beneath. "It's the company's official record," she corrected, her tone suddenly crisp. "And as an employee, you are part of the company. It is not your place to decide what is and isn't a lie." She placed a perfectly manicured hand on Lion's arm. The skin was cool, the grip surprisingly firm. The touch was meant to be reassuring, but it felt like a brand. "Just think about it, dear," Brenda finished, her smile back in place, now wielded like a weapon. "The hotel has a very long memory. We take excellent care of our team players, but we have very little patience for those who decide to play a different game." The threat was delivered with the same placid, unblinking smile. Brenda squeezed her arm one last time, a final, tactile warning, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking a sharp, dismissive rhythm on the marble floor. Lion was left standing alone, the worn notebook in her hand suddenly feeling as heavy as a shield. Lion didn't return to the main floor. The pristine, guest-facing corridors of the hotel suddenly felt alien to her. She took the staff elevator, a rattling, utilitarian box smelling faintly of bleach and metal, down to the basement. The humming descent was a welcome buffer, a journey away from the 40th floor's suffocating atmosphere and back to her own domain. Her office was a small, windowless room tucked away behind the thrumming machinery of the laundry facilities, a space of pure function, devoid of mahogany or skyline views. It was her command center, the quiet heart of the hotel's daily rhythm, and the one place she felt in control. She sat down at her modest metal desk, the adrenaline from her encounters with Albright and Brenda beginning to recede, leaving a cold, creeping dread in its place. She needed to document everything, to create her own official record of the threats and the pressure. She logged into her computer, her fingers moving swiftly over the familiar keyboard. Her password was accepted, but before her desktop could load, the screen flickered, wiped clean, and then a new window popped up stark and white. "User access revoked. Contact system administrator." She stared at the message, her blood running cold. It was a digital amputation. They hadn't just disagreed with her, they had erased her. She tried again, typing her password with frantic precision. The same window appeared, a digital wall she could not pass. They had locked her out. While Brenda was patronizing her in the hallway, someone in IT with a few keystrokes had already executed the order. She was a ghost in the machine she had helped to run. A sharp rap on her door made her jump. 2 security guards stood in the doorway. They were men she knew, men she exchanged pleasantries with every morning as they started their shifts. The senior guard, a man named George, had a daughter who had just started college, something Lion always asked about. Today, their faces were grim, their eyes fixed on a point just over her shoulder, refusing to meet hers. "Miss Mutabazi," George said, his voice heavy with a discomfort that was almost an apology. "We've been instructed to escort you from the premises." The humiliation washed over her in a hot, suffocating wave. This was it, the escalation, the public shaming designed to break her, to make an example of her. "My personal belongings," she said, her voice a strained whisper that was barely audible over the hum of the dryers next door. "You can collect your purse," George replied, reciting a line he had clearly been ordered to memorize. "The rest of your things will be boxed up and sent to you." The walk from her office to the staff exit was the longest of her life. It was the middle of a shift change, and the basement corridors, usually a place of camaraderie and shared purpose, became a gauntlet of silent stares. Her team, Maid, Jing, and the others, saw her. They were coming on duty, their faces fresh and ready for the evening shift. They saw their supervisor flanked by 2 security guards, and their smiles froze, replaced by masks of confusion and fear. Lion made eye contact with May for a fleeting second, trying to convey a strength she didn't feel, but the young woman just looked terrified. Lion kept her head held high, her gaze fixed forward, but she could feel their eyes on her, could feel their silent questions boring into her back. When she reached the exit, a heavy metal door that led to a grimy loading bay, she turned to George. "My badge." He held out his hand, and she unclipped the ID card from her tunic. For 7 years, that card had been her key, her proof of belonging. It bore her name, Lion Mutabazi, and her title, housekeeping supervisor. It was a small piece of plastic, but it represented a huge piece of her life. She placed it in his palm. As he curled his fingers around it, she knew there was no going back. They hadn't just suspended her, they had excommunicated her. They had made the decision for her. She would not, could not let them win. The fight was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. She stepped out into the gray afternoon air, the metal door swinging shut behind her with a deafening clang. Lion's apartment was the antithesis of the Grand Meridian. It was a small, 1-bedroom unit filled with warm woods, vibrant chitinge textiles from her home country draped over the sofa and chairs, and shelves overflowing with books. Novels, histories, poetry, and on the bottom shelf, a row of dense legal and linguistic textbooks. It was a space that reflected the woman, not the uniform. Here, surrounded by her own carefully curated order, the panic began to subside, replaced by a familiar, focused calm. This was not a catastrophe, it was a problem to be solved. She pulled a large storage box from her closet, its contents a history of her tenure at the hotel. Inside were years of employee handbooks, policy addendums, and training manuals, all meticulously organized. Management saw these as disposable documents, updated and discarded annually. Lion saw them as data, a paper trail of the corporation's evolving mindset. She laid them out on her dining table, arranging them by date. She found the bulletin from 6 months ago announcing upcoming revisions to the company's liability policies. Attached was a draft of the new clauses. She remembered the day it was circulated. Brenda Vance had called her to a brief, almost perfunctory meeting, an item to be checked off a long to-do list. The scene played back in her mind with perfect clarity. A small, airless conference room in the basement. Lion sat on one side of the table, and on the other, 5 members of her housekeeping staff, Mei, Jing, and 3 others, all native Mandarin speakers, their faces expectant and trusting. Brenda had slid a copy of the new English language policy across the table to Lion. "We need to make sure the team understands this," Brenda had said, already checking her phone, her attention a million miles away. "It's just legal boilerplate, but everyone needs to sign the acknowledgement form. Can you walk them through it in their language?" For the next hour, Lion had done just that. She hadn't just translated the words, she had deconstructed the concepts. She recalled Jing asking a sharp question about the phrase gross negligence. Lion hadn't just given a dictionary definition. She had drawn 2 diagrams on a whiteboard. One showed a simple accident, a spilled bucket of water. The other showed a deliberate disregard for safety, leaving a cleaning cart blocking a fire exit. "This is an accident," she had explained, pointing to the first. "This," pointing to the second, "is negligence. The policy protects you from the first. It does not protect you from the second. You see the difference?" The women had all nodded, their understanding clear. Lion had been patient, precise, and thorough, refusing to move on until every hand in the room went up to confirm they understood. Her worn blue notebook was open on the table, and in it, she had meticulously written down the Mandarin phrases she had used, ensuring her translation was not just accurate, but fair and comprehensible. She remembered the feeling of pride in that moment, the sense of profound responsibility. She was their bridge, their advocate. She was ensuring the system was transparent for them. Now, sitting at her dining table under the warm glow of a single lamp, that memory felt like a betrayal. Not her betrayal of them, but the system's betrayal of her. They had used her competence, her diligence, her linguistic skill as a tool to enact their deception. They had counted on her to build the trust with her team, only to weaponize that trust against the very people she was trying to protect. They had underestimated her, assuming she would translate the words and never think to question the intent. They had assumed wrong. They had mistaken her quiet diligence for passive obedience. A hesitant knock at her apartment door 2 days later pulled Lion from her research. She opened it to find Maid standing in the hallway, twisting the strap of her purse with an energy that was both nervous and desperate. The young woman's eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed with sleeplessness, and she looked smaller and more fragile than she did in her crisp work uniform. Lion Jai, May began, using the respectful Mandarin term for older sister, her voice barely a whisper. I am so sorry to bother you at your home. I did not know where else to go. It's no bother, May. Come in, please. Come in, Lion said, her voice gentle, ushering the young woman inside. She led her to the sofa and went to the kitchen to make tea, the simple, familiar ritual, a way of creating a small island of calm in the middle of May's distress. When she returned with 2 steaming cups, May pulled a folded, wrinkled letter from her purse and handed it to Lion. It was an official disciplinary notice from HR, placing her on formal probation due to the ongoing investigation into the Sterling incident. One more misstep, the letter implied, one more complaint from a guest, however minor, and she would be terminated. They say I did not secure the area properly, May whispered, tears welling in her eyes and tracing paths down her cheeks. But I did exactly as you taught us. I used 3 signs, not 2. I checked the floor twice. But my English, when they questioned me, I got so nervous. I think I said the wrong things. She sank onto Lion's sofa, her shoulders slumping in defeat. My mother, she just had surgery. It was very expensive. My father does not work anymore. My whole family is counting on the money I send home. If I lose this job. Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled and desperate. Lion sat down beside her, a profound sense of protective anger solidifying in her chest. This was the human cost of Albright's administrative solution and Brenda's chess game. It wasn't just about a mark on a personnel file or a tarnished service record. It was about a mother's medicine in a village in Gwangju, a family's food, a life of stability hanging precariously in the balance, threatened by the casual cruelty of powerful men who saw their employees as nothing more than entries on a balance sheet. May looked up, her expression a heartbreaking mix of hope and fear. At the hotel, everyone is scared to talk. They say you fought with Mr. Albright. They say you are in big trouble, but I told them Lion Jai will fix this. You always fix everything. The simple, unshakable faith in May's eyes was a heavier burden than any corporate threat. Lion had made a promise in that conference room, an unspoken one, to ensure these women were treated fairly, that they understood the rules of the game they were playing. The hotel had broken that promise. She would not. She placed a hand on May's shoulder, her touch firm and reassuring. You did nothing wrong, May. Your English was fine. Your work was perfect. This is not your fault. And you are right, she said, her voice low and certain, a quiet vow in the small, lamplit room. I am going to fix this. After May left, a fragile hope restored in her posture, Lion returned to her dining table with a new, ferocious clarity. This was no longer just about defending her own actions. It was about dismantling the weapon they had built to use against the most vulnerable members of her team. She needed a copy of the final, official policy manual, the one that had been published after her translation session. Her access was revoked, but she knew the hotel's digital infrastructure was a patchwork of old and new systems. Corporate sloppiness could be her secret weapon. She spent an hour on her laptop, searching public-facing sections of the parent company's website, navigating a labyrinth of investor relations portals and press kits. Finally, tucked away in a mislabeled folder titled Legacy Franchisee Onboarding, she found it, a complete, downloadable PDF of the current Grand Meridian Employee Handbook. A jolt of triumph shot through her. They had built a fortress, but they had left a side door unlocked. She opened the file and scrolled to the section on guest incidents and staff liability. Her eyes scanned the page, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. There it was, Clause 9C. With a grim sense of purpose, she took a clean sheet of paper from a legal pad and drew a line down the middle. At the top of the left column, she wrote, Mandarin translation, my notes, June 10th. At the top of the right, she wrote, Final English version, official handbook, July 1st. She added the dates deliberately. They were her proof. She opened her worn blue notebook, the pages whispering as she turned them, and found the entry from 6 months ago. Her handwriting was neat, her characters precise and clear. She found the key phrase she had so carefully crafted to convey the legal principle to her team, the one she had tested and refined to ensure there was no ambiguity. She wrote it in the left column. Chinese letter, 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 Chinese letter. Hotel not liable for guest self-inflicted injury. Then, she turned to the PDF on her screen. Her eyes scanned the dense paragraph of Clause 9C until she found the corresponding sentence. Her breath caught in her throat. The wording was subtly, brilliantly, and maliciously deceptive. She wrote it in the right column. Staff are considered liable for any incident where a guest is not adequately assisted or protected from potential harm. There it was. The trap, laid bare in black and white on her kitchen table. Her translation had been about protecting the staff from fraudulent claims, a standard defensive clause in the service industry. Their final version was a total, radical inversion. It removed the burden of proof from the guest and placed an impossible, undefined duty of adequate assistance on the staff. It made them personally responsible for anything that could conceivably happen to a guest, regardless of the guest's own behavior. It turned a shield into a sword, aimed directly at the hotel's own employees. They had reversed the meaning. They had taken her careful, honest work and twisted it into a tool of oppression, counting on the fact that no one would ever compare the two versions side by side. They were counting on the silence of their multilingual staff. They were counting on the invisibility of a housekeeping supervisor and her little lists. They were counting on her to be a good pawn and accept her fate. But she wasn't a pawn. She was the one who could see the whole board, and she had just found their fatal flaw. Lyon's first instinct was to share her discovery, to find an ally within the walls of the hotel. She called David, the junior manager in the events department. He was young, ambitious, but had always seemed to have a good heart. He had once thanked her personally after her team had flawlessly cleaned and prepped a ballroom on a ridiculously tight turnover for a high-profile wedding. "You saved me, Lyon," he had said with genuine relief. He owed her a favor. "This is unbelievable, Lyon," he whispered into the phone after she explained the discrepancy, his voice tight with shock. "It's fraud is what it is. It's racketeering. Albright has gone too far this time." "I need you to confirm something for me, David," she said, keeping her own voice level. "I need to know who signed off on the final version of that handbook. There has to be a paper trail, an email, a memo, anything." There was a long, static-filled pause on the other end of the line. She could hear him breathing, could almost feel his fear traveling through the phone. "Lyon, I can't," he finally said, his voice strained and thin. "I'm so sorry. They're watching everyone. Albright called a department head meeting this morning. It was brutal. He said you were a disgruntled employee, that you were trying to incite a staff rebellion to cover up your own negligence. He said anyone caught communicating with you would be subject to immediate disciplinary action, and he looked right at me when he said it. I think he knows I'm friends with you. I have a kid on the way, Lyon. I can't get involved." The line went dead. The click of the phone echoed in her silent apartment. He wasn't malicious, just scared. The system was designed to inspire that fear, to sever the bonds of collegiality and replace them with self-preservation. The next blow came an hour later, a heavy thud against her apartment door. A courier, impassive and official, handed her a thick, crisp envelope from a high-powered law firm whose name was embossed in gold lettering. Inside was a cease and desist letter, its language cold, sharp, and designed to terrify. It accused her of corporate espionage for being in possession of a proprietary company document and of harassment for contacting current employees. It warned her, in no uncertain terms, that any further action, including sharing her defamatory allegations, would result in a lawsuit that would ruin her financially for life. They weren't just firing her, they were trying to silence her forever. The walls of her apartment suddenly felt like they were closing in. They had cut her off from her allies, threatened her with financial ruin, and painted her as the villain in a story she was trying to correct. She was utterly alone, a single, unemployed woman against a multi-billion-dollar corporation and its army of lawyers. Doubt, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, pierced through her resolve. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was making a catastrophic mistake. What would you sacrifice to stay true? She walked to her window and looked down at the street. People bustled by, living their lives, completely unaware of the silent war being waged in the rooms above them. For a long moment, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her isolation, the crushing pressure to just give up, to let the lie stand, to disappear. Then, she thought of May's terrified face, of the unshakable trust she had placed in her. She thought of her own name, etched onto the ID badge they had taken from her. They could take her job, they could threaten her, they could isolate her, but they could not take her name, they could not have her integrity. The despair receded, replaced by a cold, hard vow that settled deep in her bones. She would see this through to the end, alone if she had to. The official notice for her disciplinary hearing arrived the next morning via certified mail, another formal, intimidating document. It was scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. sharp in the main boardroom on the 40th floor. It was Tuesday. They were giving her less than 3 days, a classic corporate tactic designed to induce panic, to prevent a well-prepared defense, to ensure the outcome was a foregone conclusion. They expected her to arrive flustered, intimidated, and ready to capitulate. Instead of panic, Lyon felt a surge of adrenaline, a current of pure, cold focus. The end game had begun. The timeline was short, but her case was simple, and she knew it was airtight. She spent the next 48 hours in methodical, almost monastic preparation. She didn't call a lawyer. This wasn't a battle she could win with legal maneuvering or procedural delays. It was a battle she had to win with indisputable truth. Her strategy would be simple, direct, and devastating. Her dining table transformed into a war room. She printed a fresh copy of the English handbook and her Mandarin notes. She highlighted the damning clauses, placing colored tabs on the relevant pages with the precision of a scholar. She wrote out a clear, concise timeline of events, from the translation meeting to her suspension, noting dates, times, and locations. She rehearsed her statement aloud to the empty apartment, refining each sentence, stripping away any trace of emotion, until only the hard, undeniable facts remained. Then, she made her most crucial move. She drafted a formal, polite email to Brenda Vance with a carbon copy to Mr. Albright's executive assistant and the general email address for the legal department. She was creating a digital paper trail they could not ignore. Dear Miss Vance, this is to confirm my attendance at the disciplinary hearing scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. In preparation for this meeting, and to ensure full clarity and understanding for all parties regarding the translation and implementation of company policies, I am formally requesting that the hotel provide an accredited, third-party Mandarin English translator to be present. As this matter pertains directly to linguistic discrepancies in official documents, the presence of a neutral expert is essential for a fair and transparent process. Please have the translator's credentials available for my review prior to the start of the meeting. Thank you. Lyon Mutabazi. She knew the request would set off alarm bells in the legal department. It was an unexpected and highly specific demand. But they couldn't refuse it. To do so would be an admission of bad faith, a procedural flaw that a real lawyer could exploit later. They would have to agree. They would, in effect, be forced to supply the very witness who would publicly confirm their deception. It was a move they would perceive as a procedural annoyance, but Lyon knew it was the linchpin of her entire plan. She hit send and felt the first, faint tremor of a shift in power. On Friday morning, she did not put on a suit or a power dress. She chose a simple, dark blue blouse and gray trousers, clothes that were neat, professional, but unremarkable. She wanted their focus to be on her words, not her appearance. She gathered her documents, placing them in a simple folder. Her worn translation notebook, the source of it all, she carried in her hand. As she left her apartment and walked toward the towering glass spire of the Grand Meridian, the city seemed to hold its breath. The morning sun glinted off the thousands of windows, making the building look like an impenetrable fortress. But she knew its secret. She knew about the cracked foundation, the fatal flaw hidden in its code. She was not a victim walking to her execution. She was a strategist, walking onto the battlefield of her own choosing, ready to rewrite the rules of the game. The boardroom was as cold and imposing as Lyon remembered, a temple of corporate power designed to make the individual feel small. A vast, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the tribunal assembled to judge her. Mr. Albright sat at the head, a silent, glowering emperor, his face a thundercloud of impatience. To his right was Brenda Vance, her face a mask of neutral, professional concern that looked brittle, as if it might crack. Two senior board members Lyon didn't recognize sat opposite them, their expensive suits a kind of armor, their expressions bored and impatient. At the far end, a thin, severe-looking man from the hotel's new legal team, his briefcase open before him, a hired gun ready for a quick kill. A single chair, small and isolated, was placed for her, positioned to feel like a witness stand. A nervous-looking man in his late 50s sat in a chair against the wall, almost out of sight. He held a notepad and wore a small lapel pin identifying him as a certified court interpreter. Albright hadn't even looked at him. They saw his presence as a minor, bizarre annoyance, a piece of bureaucratic lint to be brushed aside. They were about to learn he was the fulcrum on which the entire world was about to turn. The lawyer began, his voice a dry, reedy monotone, reading the official complaint against her: insubordination, refusal to cooperate, unauthorized possession of company documents, and a new, more serious charge of attempting to incite staff unrest. It was a neat, damning narrative designed to paint her as a rogue employee, a dangerous element to be purged. Lyon listened patiently, her hands resting calmly on the folder in her lap, her expression unreadable. "Miss Mutabazi," Albright said when the lawyer had finished, his voice dripping with condescension, a final performance for the board members. "You have been a model employee for 7 years. It is a great disappointment to us all that you have chosen this disruptive path. Do you have anything to say for yourself before we render our decision?" "I do," Lyon said, her voice clear and steady, filling the silent room with an unexpected authority. She stood and walked to the table, placing her folder and her worn blue notebook on its polished surface. "This isn't about a guest slipping on a wet floor," she began, her eyes meeting those of the two board members, ignoring Albright and Brenda completely. "And it isn't about my refusal to sign a document. This is about Clause 9C of the Grand Meridian Employee Handbook." The board members exchanged confused glances. The lawyer frowned, flipping through his copy of the handbook with a rustle of paper. "I have a copy here for everyone," she said, sliding several sheets of paper across the table, the relevant page from the manual with the clause highlighted. "Mr. Albright, Miss Vance, perhaps you'll recognize it. It's the policy you asked me to translate for my team 6 months ago." Brenda Vance shifted uncomfortably in her chair, a flicker of alarm in her eyes. "As you all can read," Lyon continued, her voice even and precise, like a scholar presenting a thesis. "The English version states that staff are liable if a guest is not adequately assisted, an intentionally vague and dangerously broad phrase. But that is not what the hotel's Mandarin-speaking employees were told the policy meant, because that is not what I translated for them." She opened her blue notebook. Its humble, dog-eared appearance was a stark contrast to the glossy corporate documents on the table. It looked authentic. It looked true. "This is my logbook where I keep contemporaneous notes of my work. In it, I have my translation from that session, dated June 10th. My translation of Clause 9C, the one I was instructed to convey to my team, reads as follows." She read the Mandarin aloud, her pronunciation perfect and clear. She then gave the English meaning, her voice ringing with clarity. "The hotel is not liable for guest self-inflicted injury." Absolute silence descended upon the room. Albright stared at her, his face turning a dangerous shade of red, a vein throbbing in his temple. Lion turned her calm gaze to the man against the wall. "Sir," she said to the interpreter, "you are an accredited professional sworn to impartiality. I have just read 2 versions of a contract clause, one in English from the official company handbook, one in Mandarin from my dated notes. In your professional opinion, do they carry the same meaning?" The interpreter, now the focus of every eye in the room, cleared his throat. He looked down at his own notes where he had written both versions. He looked up, his gaze steady. "No, madam," he said, his voice firm and unequivocal. "They do not. In fact, they are functionally opposites. The English version places liability on the staff. The Mandarin version explicitly removes it." A collective gasp, sharp and audible, came from the 2 board members. They stared at Albright and Brenda, their faces masks of cold, dawning fury. The lawyer for the hotel slowly, deliberately, closed his briefcase with a soft, final click. The trap had been sprung, and every single person in that room knew who had just been caught in it. The immediate aftermath was a silent, controlled implosion. One of the board members, a formidable-looking woman with silver hair and a gaze that could cut steel, held up a hand to stop Albright before he could sputter a defense. "This hearing is adjourned," she said, her voice glacial, each word a chip of ice. She then pointed a finger at Albright, Brenda, and the lawyer, a gesture of absolute final judgment. "You 3 will wait for me in my office. Now." She didn't look at Lion as she swept out of the room, but the message was clear. The trial was over and the sentences were about to be handed down. Lion gathered her papers, her hands perfectly steady. As she turned to leave, the lawyer, the same man whose firm had sent her a letter threatening her with ruin, avoided her gaze, his face pale and clammy. Brenda looked utterly defeated, the mask of corporate poise shattered, revealing the panicked face beneath. Albright just stared at the polished surface of the table, his empire crumbling around him in the oppressive silence. Lion didn't have to wait long. 2 hours later, her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered it. "Miss Mutabazi, this is Eleanor Vance." It was the silver-haired board member. "I have just concluded a very illuminating conversation with Mr. Albright and Miss Vance," Eleanor began, her voice devoid of corporate pleasantries. It was the sound of pure, efficient power. "Their employment at the Grand Meridian has been terminated, effective immediately. Our legal counsel has been replaced." Lion was momentarily stunned into silence. She had expected a fight, a negotiation, a protracted battle. She had not expected a corporate decapitation. "On behalf of the board," Eleanor continued, "I want to offer you a formal apology. What was done was not just unethical, it was despicable, and it exposed this company to an existential level of risk. We would like to rectify the situation. We are prepared to offer you a settlement of 5 years' salary, tax-free for your trouble. We will also, of course, reinstate you to your position, with a promotion to Director of Housekeeping for the entire hotel group, effective immediately. We need people with your integrity." The offer was staggering. It was everything she could have possibly dreamed of: financial security, public vindication, a powerful new role. It was the victor's spoils, a golden ticket back into the world that had tried to eject her. And yet, it felt wrong. A promotion would put her inside the very system that had produced an Albright and a Brenda. A settlement check would be a quiet, private solution to a public, systemic problem. It would fix her life, but it wouldn't fix the hotel. It wouldn't protect the next May Lai from the next quiet deception. She thought of her promise to May, of her own quiet vow in her apartment. "Thank you, Miss Vance," Lion said, her voice calm and measured. "It's a very generous offer, but I can't accept it." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Lion could almost hear the gears turning in Eleanor Vance's powerful mind. "I don't want a promotion," Lion continued, the words coming from a place of deep, unshakable conviction. "I don't want hush money. I want a new policy. I want you to fix the manual. And I want a system put in place, a permanent one that ensures this can never, ever happen to anyone else again." This was her choice. Not vengeance, not personal enrichment, but lasting, meaningful change. Justice that echoed. It was the one demand they hadn't anticipated and the only one that truly mattered. Eleanor Vance was a woman who understood power, and she recognized that Lyon's demand was more profound and, in the long run, more valuable than any lawsuit. It was a demand for institutional integrity. To her credit, she did not argue. She saw the wisdom in it immediately. "Tell me what you have in mind," she said. The result was the Policy Integrity Mandate, a company-wide initiative that was drafted over the next 2 weeks with Lyon's direct, though remote, input. Lyon would review the drafts Eleanor sent her, adding notes and suggestions, acting as an unseen architect of her own legacy. The core tenets were simple and revolutionary for the hotel group. First, any policy document affecting employees who were non-native English speakers had to undergo a certified, triple-verified translation process by independent contractors, not internal staff. Second, the translated versions would be co-signed by staff representatives and hold equal legal weight to the English original. No more fine print. No more linguistic loopholes. But the most significant change was the creation of a new body, the Staff Policy Council. This was Lyon's most insistent demand. It was to be a permanent, paid committee composed of elected representatives from every department of the hotel, from housekeeping and kitchen staff to concierge and engineering. No new HR policy, no change to the employee handbook, no disciplinary procedure could be implemented without a majority approval from this council. It was a fundamental shift of power, a check and balance placed directly into the hands of the workforce. The first elections were held a month later. The announcement was met first with disbelief, then with a surge of empowerment among the staff. Maid, her probationary notice rescinded and replaced with a formal written apology from Eleanor Vance herself, was nominated by her peers. She stood before her colleagues, her voice trembling but clear, and accepted the nomination. She won in a landslide. For the first time, the people who swept the floors and changed the sheets had a formal, powerful voice in the rules that governed their lives. Lyon watched the changes from afar, receiving updates from Eleanor. She saw the new, dual-language handbooks being printed. She saw the announcement of the council's formation and the names of the elected representatives. The change wasn't just a memo or a mission statement. It was a structural rewiring of the hotel's power dynamic. It was concrete. It was real. And it was her victory, more satisfying than any promotion or settlement could ever be. A few weeks after the council was formed, Lyon received a text from May. "We are having a small party in the staff cafeteria. To celebrate the council. Please, will you come? You are our guest of honor." Lyon hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. Walking back into the hotel felt strange, like visiting a place from a past life. She didn't use the grand lobby entrance with its towering flower arrangements and hushed opulence, but went in through the staff doors in the loading bay. The familiar scent of industrial laundry soap and cooking steam was a comforting echo. The cafeteria was buzzing with a life she had never seen there before. It was usually a place of quiet, tired meals. Tonight it was vibrant. Someone had brought in a speaker and music was playing softly. Her entire former team was there, along with staff from the kitchens and maintenance, all mingling. They had pushed tables together and laid out a feast of dishes from their home countries: Filipino pancit, Mexican tamales, Chinese dumplings, Salvadoran pupusas. When Lyon walked in, a cheer went up, a warm, genuine wave of affection that brought an unexpected sting to her eyes. She wasn't in uniform. She was just Lyon in a simple dress. May and Jing rushed to her, pulling her into a hug. There were no grand speeches, no performative thanks. The healing was in the small, quiet moments. It was in the way the gruff, elderly head chef, a man of few words, brought her a plate of his best har-gow dumplings, muttering, "For our protector." It was in the way the older laundry workers, women who had been with the hotel for decades, nodded to her with deep, silent respect. May pulled out her phone and showed Lyon a photo of her mother, smiling and waving from a hospital bed in Gwangju, a bouquet of flowers on her bedside table. "She is recovering well," May said, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. "She says to thank the brave woman who saved her daughter's job. She wants me to tell you that in our village, we now have a story about the supervisor from the tall building who fought like a tiger for her people." Lyon felt a warmth spread through her chest that no amount of money could buy. This was the true resolution. It wasn't about the downfall of Albright or the victory in the boardroom. It was here, in this noisy, joyful cafeteria, surrounded by the people she had fought for. It was the restoration of their safety, their dignity, and their community. This was the justice that mattered. As the small party began to wind down, a figure appeared in the doorway of the cafeteria. It was Eleanor Vance. A hush fell over the room, the staff instinctively deferential to the woman who now ran the entire hotel group. Eleanor, however, had eyes only for Lion. She navigated the crowded room with an easy grace, nodding politely to the staff, her presence commanding but not intimidating. She walked directly to Lion's table, where Lion was sharing a piece of cake with May. "Miss Mutabazi," Eleanor said quietly, so only those at the table could hear. "I was hoping I might find you here. This is wonderful." She gestured to the remnants of the feast, a genuine smile on her face. Lion stood, inclining her head politely. "Miss Vance, it's good to see the staff morale is so high." "It is," Eleanor agreed. "Thanks to you, which is why I'm here." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The new council is struggling," she admitted with a wry smile. "They have the passion, the conviction, but they lack the procedural knowledge to be effective. They are getting bogged down in arguments over minor clauses. They need a leader, someone who understands both the staff's perspective and the company's language, someone who can command the respect of both sides." She slid a business card across the table. It was her personal card with a handwritten number on the back. "This is a formal offer. We would like to hire you as an independent consultant. Your sole mandate would be to act as the first chair of the Staff Policy Council. You would not report to management. You would report only to the council itself. Your salary would be drawn from a neutral, third-party fund. You would be their guide, their teacher, and their advocate." The offer was brilliant in its understanding of who Lion was. It wasn't a promotion to rejoin the hierarchy she had exposed. It was a new role, created just for her, that honored her unique position as a bridge between two worlds. It recognized her not for her ability to manage cleaners, but for her ability to architect systems of justice. Lion looked at May, who was beaming with a pride so intense it seemed to light up her face. She looked at the faces around the room, people who were now empowered because of her actions. A door had been opened, not just for her, but for all of them. This was her chance to walk through it and make sure it stayed open forever. She picked up the card. "I'll consider it," she said, a small, thoughtful smile playing on her lips, but they both knew she had already accepted. The first meeting of the new Staff Policy Council took place a week later in the same boardroom where Lion had been judged. This time, however, the room had been transformed. The long, intimidating mahogany table, a symbol of a top-down hierarchy, had been removed. In its place was a large, square arrangement of smaller tables, so everyone sat as equals, facing each other. The representatives were a cross-section of the hotel's lifeblood, a chef in his checkered pants, a maintenance engineer with grease on his hands and a thoughtful expression, a young, sharp-eyed concierge, a veteran bellman, and May Lai, sitting straight and proud, a folder of notes open before her. Lion sat at the head of the arrangement, not as a boss, but as a facilitator. She was in her own clothes, a symbol that she stood apart from the management structure, her allegiance solely to the integrity of this new process. To begin the meeting, she didn't present a PowerPoint or distribute a memo. She simply reached into her bag and took out her old, worn, blue translation notebook. She placed it in the center of the table. It lay there under the bright corporate lights, humble and out of place. Its dog-eared corners and soft, faded cover were a stark contrast to the room's sleek, modern aesthetic. The maintenance engineer, a practical man named Carlos, picked it up, flipping through its pages with a look of reverence. He saw the neat columns, the precise characters, the evidence of years of quiet, meticulous work. A young man from the events team, the same David who had been too afraid to help her, had been elected to represent his department. He looked at the notebook, his face etched with a mixture of shame and respect. "What's that, Miss Mutabazi?" "It's a reminder," Lion said, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "It's a reminder that the most important truths are often hidden in the smallest details. It's a reminder that our job here is to read the fine print, to ask the hard questions, and to listen to the quietest voices. The official story is not always the whole story." She pushed the notebook gently toward the center of the table. "This," she said, looking each member in the eye, is our first rule. We look closer, we listen better, and we never, ever assume that the person with the quietest voice has nothing to say. The notebook, once a private log of her invisible work, had been transformed. It was now a public symbol of their new mission. It was their constitution, a tangible reminder of the integrity they were all sworn to uphold. It was no longer just her story, it was now a part of everyone's. Carlos closed it gently and placed it back in the center of the table, where it sat for the rest of the meeting, a silent, powerful guardian of their purpose. 6 months later, a new class of employees was gathered for their orientation. They sat in a bright, airy training room, the nervous energy of their first day palpable. Their new uniforms were folded neatly beside them. The HR trainer, a new hire herself, stood at the front of the room, her presentation projected on a large screen behind her. "Here at the Grand Meridian," the trainer said, her voice bright with genuine enthusiasm, "we have a unique approach to policy. It's called the Policy Integrity Mandate." She clicked to a new slide. On the screen was a high-resolution photograph of a single page from a notebook, covered in beautiful, handwritten Mandarin characters. "Before any new rule is made, it is reviewed and approved by the Staff Council, a body elected by you and your peers," the trainer explained. "Just last month, the Council successfully amended the overtime policy to ensure fairer distribution of hours. Your voice matters here, from day one." She then gestured to a simple, elegant frame on the wall. Inside it, protected under glass, was the real thing, the first page of Lyon's handwritten notes from her blue notebook. Underneath it, a small brass plaque read, the document that rewrote the rules. "This all started here," the trainer said, her voice softening with reverence. "With a housekeeping supervisor who insisted that every voice deserved to be heard and every word deserved to be true. She taught us that integrity isn't a corporate buzzword. It's a standard you hold, especially when no one is watching." Lyon was not in the room. She was on a video call from her apartment, which now served as her consulting office. On her screen were the faces of the council chairs from the hotel group's properties in Singapore, London, and Dubai. She was mentoring them, teaching them how to build their own systems of integrity, her quiet revolution now a global movement. The final shot is of a young, newly hired housekeeper from the back of the orientation room. She is looking at the framed document on the wall, a slow smile spreading across her face, a smile not of fear or deference but of understanding and security. The room was safe. The rules were fair. The legacy was complete and self-perpetuating, a quiet, powerful echo in every corner of the hotel.